Good morning. I'm Jay Woodruff, a member of your parish committee. We're glad that you're here online or in person here in our beautiful sanctuary. Special welcome to visitors. We invite you to join us downstairs or online for community time following the service. Our mission is to build community, search for meaning, deepen our spirituality, and make a better world. If you have questions about First Parish or Unitarian Universalism, someone from our membership team will be at the welcome table during coffee hour to greet you and answer any questions. Reverend Lisa and Kate Howland, our Director of Lifespan Education, are also available after the service and would love to meet you. A big thanks to all of our service participants whose names are in the order of service. And please remember to silence your cell phones for our time together. Please join me now in taking a moment to say hello to one another. And a wave to those online. A heartfelt welcome to you all. Let us now turn our hearts and minds to the worship. Laurel Whitehouse will light the chalice while we say, with open minds and loving hearts, we gather to search for meaning, to care for one another, and to work together for a better world.
Morning to all of those here in the sanctuary and those joining us on Zoom. I'm Reverend Lisa Perrywood. My pronouns are she and her. This month our theme is deep listening, and we'll be focusing on different ways to practice our listening skills. And today is all about listening to the lessons of the land. Tomorrow, we observe Indigenous Peoples Day, especially remembering the Native American tribes who lived and still live in this area. On this holiday weekend, we acknowledge and honor those people whose land we are occupying today. The land we now call Wayland sat at the intersection of 4 Native American tribal territories: the Agawam, Massachusetts, Nipmuc, and Pawtucket. We pay respect to the people of these tribes, past and present, and honor the land itself, which remains sacred to the people who remain. This is Once the World Was Perfect by Joy Harjo. Once the world was perfect and we were happy in that world. Then we took it for granted. Discontent began a small rumble in the earthly mind. Then doubt pushed through with its spiked head. And once doubt ruptured the web, all manner of demon thoughts jumped through. We destroyed the world we had been given for inspiration, for life. Each stone of jealousy, each stone of fear, greed, envy, and hatred put out the light. No one was without a stone in his or her hand. There we were, right back where we had started. We were bumping into each other in the dark, and now we had no place to live since we didn't know how to live with each other. Then one of the stumbling ones took pity on another and shared a blanket. A spark of kindness made a light. The light made an opening in the darkness. Everyone worked together to make a ladder. A Wind Clan person climbed out first into the next world, and then the other clans, the children of those clans, their children, and their children, all the way through time to now, into this morning light to you. Into this morning light to you. Dear friends, come now into this sacred and beloved space we co-create each week, and let us worship together. Now please rise as you're willing and or able and join in singing hymn number 1067. It's in the teal hymnal, Mother Earth, Beloved Garden.
This morning's story is adapted from a book by April Halprin Wayland. Izzy loved Rosh Hashanah. It was the high holy days, the beginning of the holiest time, the most special time in the Jewish year. Izzy loved to start the new year with the taste of apples and honey, so the first thing on his tongue for the new year would be sweet. Izzy loved the sound of the shofar, the ram horn, blowing and blowing. And most of all, Izzy loved Taslech. Izzy's whole family was making an I'm sorry list in preparation for Taslech. Izzy had 3 things on his list. He was sorry for drawing on his sister Miriam's forehead one time when she was asleep. He was really very sorry for losing his mom's ring in a store. And the 3rd thing really made Izzy wince. He had broken Mrs. Bickerson's drum, the old one, the one he wasn't even supposed to touch. And then Izzy remembered a 4th thing. He had broken his promise and told the secret that his friend Ben had shared, that sometimes Ben still sucked his thumb. That was going to be hard to explain. So Izzy's family went to the synagogue for the Rosh Hashanah service, and before the service began, all the kids were running around outside playing tag, and one of the kids pointed at Izzy and said, "Tag, you're it." Izzy looked at that one finger and thought about the first thing on his list. And so he went over to his sister and he said, "I'm sorry I drew on your forehead." And his sister Miriam said, "What?" And he said, "I'm sorry I drew space dog on your forehead that time you were asleep." And she said, "Oh, that was nothing. And I won't call you Big Snot anymore." And Izzy said, "But I like being called Big Snot." And he grabbed the hair ribbon out of her hair and ran off with it. She shrieked and ran after him, and their mother said, "Peace, children." And she held up a peace sign, and those 2 fingers reminded Izzy he had more work on his list. He said to his mother, "I'm sorry I lost your ring in the store." She said, "I know, honey. And I'm sorry that I'm always on the phone when we're together. I'm really going to try to use the phone much, much less in the future." And so they all went into the synagogue for the service, and afterwards everyone all together walked down towards the water and the pier, all the families together. And they got to the top of a big hill looking down toward the water where the pier, the big dock, ran out. And Izzy saw coming towards him Mrs. Bickerson and her 2 dogs. And he knew he had more work. He had to go talk to Mrs. Bickerson. Oh, no, he didn't. Yes, he did. Mrs. Bickerson came closer and shouted, "Hi, hello, Izzy." And Izzy said, "Hi, and Mrs. Bickerson shouted, "Good gracious," her 2 big dogs were towing her off up the street. And she called over her shoulder, "See you next week. Come see me." "Phew," said Izzy. And he ran to catch up with everyone else as they went down, and they got to the edge of the water and walked out on the long pier, the long dock, and they waited in silence. And then Rabbi Neil and Izzy's father lifted 2 shofars, those curly ram's horns, to their lips, and they took giant breaths and began to blow. And just like here this morning, the sound came out and filled everywhere. And the sound went on, and who knew when it would stop? Which of them would run out of air first? Izzy counted to 10, and still the sound was going on. And finally, Rabbi Neil ran out of air, and Izzy's dad managed one more little squeak out of the shofar. Everyone laughed and clapped. And so the next thing that happened was that Izzy's mom gave him some stale bread. So Taslech is the time in the Jewish year when people reflect on things from the past year that they are sorry about, that they need to apologize for, things they did, they wish they didn't, things they didn't do that they wish they had, or things they wish they had done differently. Taslech means to throw. And so at this time of year, what the Jewish people are doing is releasing all those things they don't want or need. It's like clearing out your heart's closet. So you start with a clean heart for the new year. So Izzy ripped a little piece of bread and whispered, "I'm sorry I drew on Miriam's forehead," tossed it, and a seagull plucked it right out of the air. But it didn't matter because Izzy's heart felt better. He ripped a second piece of bread and he whispered, "I'm sorry I lost Mom's ring." And he tossed that one, and a fish snatched it from below. And then Izzy noticed that Ben was standing right next to them, and he looked down at the 4 feet in a row, and he thought about the 4th thing on his list, and he knew he had to apologize to Ben. No, he didn't. Yes, he did. And so he opened his mouth, but Ben was already speaking. He said, "Izzy, I'm sorry I didn't help you look for your notebook, the time you lost it and you couldn't find it anywhere." "Yeah," thought Ben, "that's true." Thought Izzy, "Ben didn't help me look for my notebook." But he took a deep breath and he said, "That's okay. And I am sorry that I told your secret. I promised I wouldn't, and I did, about still sucking your thumb sometimes. That was mean, and I am sorry." Izzy wished that Ben would say something. Finally, Ben said, "Izzy, we have been friends a long, 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 long time, right?" "Right," said Izzy. "Then because we have been friends for such a long time, you are 100% forgiven." And they laughed and they hugged each other. And when everyone was done casting their bread, throwing their bread for Teslach, they all walked home together. Their bread bags were empty, and they had clean, wide-open hearts. And now our children and their adults will go downstairs to seek.
After all this time, I'd know what I'm doing. Good morning, I'm Ted Barnes. My pronouns are he, his, him, and I'm a lay minister at this congregation. This is the time in our service we set aside to acknowledge the joys and sorrows that we hold. In both our sharing and our witness, we affirm our covenant to care for one another. Each Sunday, we light a vigil candle in recognition of the pain and suffering being experienced around the world due to ongoing war and violence. May this small act help us unite in our prayer for the end to all this suffering. If you have a personal joy and or sorrow you would like to share, please feel free to come forward now or raise your hand and I will bring you the mic. Those online can type their joys and sorrows into the chat and I will read them. Hold in our hearts those who have spoken, those they have named, and those we hold in silence. May it be so.
Please join me now in the spirit of prayer. Spirit of life and love, God of all names and no name, we come together at the end of another week. Some of us holding the heaviness of struggles of health, home, or work. In this community, may we make space for all that needs to be shared. The joys and sorrows, angers and hopes, offering our love and strength. We pause this holiday weekend and make space to acknowledge the lives lost from European colonization on this land we call our own. We offer amends and we remember. May we learn from those old ways, never to repeat them in our lives today. May we develop new ways of relating to neighbor and stranger without violence or deceit or greed. Loving Spirit, as a community of faith, may we be a safe harbor in a world that is often harsh toward differences. May we ever use our presence as a healing force for justice and equity, knowing that though we have come far in the human rights struggles of our times, many people are still left behind. And the work of building the beloved community is just as pressing as ever before. Now let's pause for a moment of silence. Now we invite you to join in singing number 123, Spirit of Life, quietly in your seats. The offering we give each week is a symbol of our commitment to this community and to the free faith of this church. We receive it gratefully, with appreciation for our community and all that sustains us. If you're here for the first time, please let the plate pass you by. You are our guest. You may place your offering in the plate as it comes around, or give by text or online. The giving instructions are in your order of service. The offering will now be given and gratefully received. This is Try to Praise the Mutilated World by Adam Zagajewski. Try to praise the mutilated world. Remember June's long days and wild strawberries, drops of wine, the dew, the nettles that methodically overgrow the abandoned homesteads of exiles. You must praise the mutilated world. You watched the stylish yachts and ships. One of them had a long trip ahead of it, while salty oblivion awaited others. You've seen the refugees heading nowhere. You've heard the executioners sing joyfully. You should praise the mutilated world. Remember the moments when we were together in a white room and the curtain fluttered. Return in thought to the concert where music flared. You gathered acorns in the park in autumn and leaves eddied over the earth's scars. Praise the mutilated world and the gray feathers a thrush lost and the gentle light that strays and vanishes and returns. Polly and choir, that was just lovely. Just perfect for today. Thank you. As I read Louise Dunlap's powerful book, Inherited Silence, over the past couple of weeks, I was moved by the questions that it raised. Whose land are we living on? How do we claim it as ours? How did the indigenous people who lived on this land for centuries before colonization care for the land? What can we learn from them? These are questions without easy answers, inviting a deep encounter with the lands we occupy and the indigenous peoples who remain. Next, I wondered, how well do we know the history of the land our congregation calls home? What do we know about the indigenous people who historically or currently inhabit this land? Do we know who the indigenous people or communities are who live in this region, what their hopes and dreams and struggles are? Are any of us currently in relationship with any of these communities? I don't know the answers to these questions. I'm hoping that some of you do, or maybe we can learn together. All of these are vital questions to ask about any New England, really any U.S. congregation's history. And if our answer to any of these questions is, we don't know, it's not because the questions are irrelevant or unimportant. It's because the power structure from our colonial heritage relies on our not knowing, on our not caring, not connecting. And this is the inherited silence that Dunlap talks about. The way we, as the dominant culture, have been trained not to talk about history that wouldn't necessarily reflect very well on us or our people. In this 404th anniversary year of the invasion of Wampanoag land by Pilgrim settlers, we are called to account by our indigenous kin. What have we done to learn about our own history of stolen land and wealth built on the backs of oppressed and enslaved human labor? What are the visions of the indigenous people who still live here? How can we act in solidarity with them? One of those visions has included changing the state seal, the one on our state flag. You may not have looked at it very closely for a while. I meant to bring an image, but you can go and look at it afterward. When you see it for the first time, it's pretty shocking. An upraised arm holding a sword pointed down at the figure of an indigenous person. How and why, one wonders, does this violent symbol represent our state? Unless it's to keep in mind our violence toward indigenous peoples in our region. In 2021, after many, many years of advocacy, the Massachusetts legislature established a commission on the seal and motto of the Commonwealth, inviting Native leaders from the Wampanoag, Nipmuc, and Massachusetts nations to meet with legislators, historians, and others. In 2023, they were charged to design a new flag, seal, and motto. And this process is painfully slow, so our support is still definitely needed. This is just one of the many ways we can make reparations for the pain of the past. This weekend, as Native and non-Native people across the country honor Indigenous Peoples Day, our Jewish neighbors have been marking one of the most solemn high holy days, Yom Kippur. On this day, Jewish people reflect on the year, on goals, on past actions, how their behavior may have hurt others, as we heard in the story that Laurel told, seeking forgiveness for wrongs done against God and other human beings. This practice of atonement, acknowledging wrong actions and providing a path to repentance, leads to a day of creating love and brotherhood, a day of abandoning hatred, jealousy, and strife. It's a profound act of repair, practiced by a people who have been wronged historically and repeatedly over the centuries. Because the act of repair is always healing for all of us. In her book, Louise Dunlap suggests a path for us to move toward repair. A path that begins by learning about our silenced history, seeking out Indigenous authors, exploring our own family stories, asking questions, expressing curiosity without blaming or shaming, because that only holds the oppression in place. In her book, Dunlap, whose family owns a large property in Napa Valley, shares the violent history she uncovered of the extermination of Native peoples in that area of California, really all over California. She urges us to engage in our own exploration, forging right relationship with Native peoples, being willing to read and listen to stories that may be hard to hear. It begins, she suggests, by allowing ourselves to feel all of the feelings that may come up as we listen. Grief, shame, guilt, denial, defensiveness, anger, rage. Many of us have already done this kind of work. It's not easy, but it's both necessary and it is also the path to healing. Keep learning, Dunlap says. And when we feel ready, speak out. Take action in solidarity, following the leadership of our Indigenous siblings. You might consider, as I have been, attending the Day of Mourning in Plymouth, the morning of Thanksgiving Day. Talk about the history that has been silenced, both personal and collective, she says. Support Native speakers and actions with your attention, your presence, and your wealth, if you're able. There are countless efforts across the U.S. to repair and restore not just tribal lands, but to face hideous acts like the kidnapping of indigenous children to boarding schools and the history of genocide. Movements to remove offensive symbols and statues, to change sports teams' names. It's hard to believe that there are still teams out there named with offensive Native American names. We know this, right? Consider reparations in many different forms. Indigenous people are still here, still in relationship with their homelands, still fighting to protect their ancestral relationships to all human beings, all living things, which is to all of our benefit. And truly, it's actually self-destructive for us to ignore them. Some of us, like Louise Dunlap and myself, need to wrestle with our own personal history of family wealth built on land acquisition. I have a family history of wealth gleaned from trade in China and the building of railroads across this country. Yet all I was ever told were the conquerors' stories. Reflecting on this, I realized that the shame I've often felt about my family history of land and trade has kept me frozen. I've shied away from the hard questions, not really sure I wanted to know the answers, and recognizing that those who do know the answers don't really want to deal with them. 4 years ago, I recommitted to looking more deeply into my own personal history, understanding that an attitude of curiosity could be the bridge between shame and facing hard truths. Letting my curiosity lead me, I learned that parts of my family bought the island of Nishan, one of the Elizabeth Islands off Cape Cod, from an Englishman who, with the permission of the governor, deprived the Native Americans of their own land by claiming to buy out their shares of an island which actually had no shareholders. In other words, he stole the land from them. My own family began spending summers on this island just 10 years ago, and yet now that I've begun to learn this history, I cannot unknow it. I'm just starting to consider the conversations that might be initiated or what repair might even look like. But I am thinking about it. Many of us, maybe all of us who have benefited in one way or another, need to consider the idea of repair. According to Daniel R. Wildcat, a Yuchi member of the Muskogee Nation, reparations has a very different meaning for Indigenous Americans. The greatest harm done us, says Wildcat, was the theft of our land, our homeland, often accompanied by forced removals and under the cover of law. To American Indians, he says, land is not simply a property value or a piece of real estate. It's a source of traditions and identities, ones that have emerged from centuries and millennia of relationships with landscapes and seascapes. That territory is irreplaceable. For many Native Americans, the land, including the air, the water, biological life on which we depend, is a natural relative, not a natural resource. Their justice traditions require the restoration of relationship with the land, not simply monetary reparations. We'll need to listen to them, to follow their lead, to learn to listen to the land. In my cursory research this past week, I learned that at least some of the land, which became the town of Wayland, was purchased by early settlers from Carto, a member of one of the local tribes, for 5 coats, 5 waistcoats, 5 shirts, 5 pair of stockings, 5 pair of shoes, 5 hatchets, 5 hoes, 5 knives, 5 pounds of tobacco, and 10 fandom of wampum pig. Carto signed this deed by drawing a 4-legged animal lying on its back with its feet in the air. It's quite a fitting symbol of surrender, don't you think? In the words of Laura Bogle, we gather here to remember that this is our home, but not just ours. The land we live on, this water we drink, this air we breathe, these old mountains that hold us steady to our ground, these forests that give us their healing green, these flowers that give us their beauty and fragrance, these fields that give us our daily bread, these stars that show us our place, the wilderness and the tame backyards, all of it our home. We remember the ancestors who lived on this land and who shaped it. The Massachusetts people, the settlers, the farmers, the hunters, the immigrants, the artists, the families, the business people, the engineers, the builders, the scientists, the teachers, the workers, the leaders. We inherit their choices. We honor the animals and creatures that have made their home in this land, the ones here now, the ones that used to be here. We envision the future generations who will live on this land and let their voices fill our hearts. We gather here to remember this is our home, but not just ours. As non-Native Americans, we're encouraged to think deeply about what it means to support Indigenous people to restore their relationship with the land. We'll need an openness to be taught, honest curiosity, asking questions to which we truly want the answers, and a willingness to face hard truths at times about what cannot be restored properly. We need to listen to what the land has to tell us. This kind of exploration is well worth doing because it has the potential to reopen our own connections to the land, the air, the water, to non-human life that many of us have lost. This exploration can help us say, I'm sorry, as we heard earlier. It can help us grieve and heal. It's not an easy journey, but this kind of reconnection to the earth is one that my spirit longs for, and maybe yours does too. May it be so. Amen. Blessed be. Please join me in our chalice extinguishing words. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts and out into the world until we are together again. Now please rise as you are willing and are able, and join in singing hymn number 1020, the Teal hymnal, Woyaya. Take off your shoes, This land you're standing on is holy ground. Take off your shoes. This spot you're standing on is holy ground. Every spot on earth like drapes around. Every spot I walk on is holy ground. Beloved friends, take all that we have shared here this morning out into the world. Be a blessing to all those you meet, and may you yourselves be blessed. Amen.